Come closer, my child. I need you near me for this. The hour was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes the soul listen even when the mind wants to sleep. Midnight passed like a breath, and yet heaven leaned in. I called your name softly, not to alarm you, not to frighten you, but because something precious connected to you and stepped into a moment that could not go unnoticed. I watched as the night wrapped itself around a conversation that was never meant to happen, and I would not allow it to pass unseen. I saw your soulmate standing where they should not have lingered, speaking words they did not fully understand to a stranger whose presence carried weight beyond the shadows. Their voice sounded calm on the surface, but inside them was a tremor, a nervous pull they could not explain. They told themselves it was harmless, just words exchanged beneath a moon that would forget by morning. But I do not forget, my child. I hear every whisper that brushes against destiny. That stranger was not random. Nothing about this meeting was accidental. I watched your soulmate hesitate, glance around, and ignore the quiet warning pressing against their chest. Fear and curiosity wrestled within them, and for a moment curiosity won. They did not know they were stepping into a snare already tightened by jealousy, desperation, and a plan formed long before that night arrived. I want you to know this now, before the shock reaches your heart. I was there the moment it began. I stood between what could destroy and what I intend to redeem. Even when your soulmate spoke words they should not have spoken, even when they listened longer than wisdom allowed, my hand did not leave them. I marked that moment, and I began to move. You may have felt restless that night, a stirring in your spirit, a heaviness you could not explain, a sudden urge to pray, or to check your phone, or to look out into the dark. That was not coincidence. That was connection. Your soul felt the ripple of what was unfolding, because your presence in their life is not symbolic, it is structural. You are part of the architecture of their protection, even when distance separates you. Listen to me carefully. What happened at midnight was not the end of the story. It was the opening of an investigation. Heaven does not rush, but it does not delay. I allowed the conversation to unfold just enough to expose motives, just enough to draw out hidden intentions, just enough for truth to leave fingerprints on the night. By morning, nothing would be invisible anymore. If your heart is receiving this word, I ask you gently to pause for a moment. If this resonates, let others who are listening walk with you. Touch the space that allows this message to travel, and if you feel led, remain connected here. And type in the comments the words "I trust your timing" as a quiet agreement between you and me. This is not for attention. This is alignment. Your soulmate did not know how close they were to a turning point. They thought they were managing a problem, negotiating peace, or avoiding confrontation. They did not realize they were being watched by forces both human and spiritual. I watched the stranger's eyes. I heard the tone beneath their voice. I knew the history they carried like a concealed blade. I am telling you this now so fear does not take root later. What is coming may look severe before it looks merciful. What unfolds may sound harsh before it reveals justice. But remember this, my child. I found them before the consequences could become fatal. I intervened before the lie could bury the truth forever. That midnight whisper was not stronger than my authority. And what begins in darkness will be answered in light. I watched the moment stretch, my child, when the stranger leaned closer and your soulmate felt the air change. It was subtle, like a temperature shift in the soul, easy to dismiss if one is already tired, already burdened. The stranger's words were measured, calm, almost friendly, but they carried an edge wrapped in familiarity. They spoke as if they knew things they should not know, as if history had already been written between them. Your soulmate felt that strange pull of recognition and confusion, wondering how someone unknown could speak with such confidence into their life. This was the split-second choice, the one that did not look dangerous on the surface. Stay or leave. Listen or walk away. Your soulmate told themselves they were being cautious, that gathering information was safer than reacting. Inside them lived a fear of unfinished business, of past mistakes resurfacing, of old consequences finally knocking. That fear made them still, and stillness in the wrong moment can open a door. The stranger spoke of opportunities, of solutions, of ways to make pressure disappear. Each sentence sounded reasonable, yet every word was layered with manipulation. I saw your soulmate's shoulders tighten. I felt the war inside them, the desire to protect their future battling the instinct to flee. They thought they were strong enough to handle the exchange without consequence. They did not realize the stranger had already chosen them as a piece in a larger design. Understand this, my child. The stranger was not powerful on their own. What gave them boldness was envy fed by time, resentment sharpened by watching your soulmate move forward while others remained stuck. Someone close had spoken your soulmate's name in the wrong rooms. Someone had shared fragments of their story with bitterness instead of love. That is how the stranger knew where to stand at midnight, and how to sound convincing. Your soulmate had to question they should not have asked. He was small, almost innocent, but it revealed uncertainty. The stranger seized it immediately, offering reassurance laced with threat. I felt the moment tip. I allowed it to go one breath longer, not because I was absent, but because exposure requires light, and light needs space to enter. Your soulmate made the choice to continue the conversation. It was not rebellion. It was fear wearing the mask of responsibility. They believed they were protecting something important, maybe even protecting you, by hearing the stranger out. They did not see the net forming beneath the words, tightening quietly with every exchange. I need you to hear this without blame clouding your heart. I am not disappointed in them. I am aware of their weakness, and I am already accounting for it. I know how heavy the pressure has been on their mind, how long they have carried guilt they never confessed, how silence became their coping language. That is what the enemy studies, my child. Not strength, but fatigue. The stranger made a request disguised as a suggestion. It sounded harmless, almost administrative, but it crossed a line. In that moment, I placed a weight on your soulmate's spirit, a discomfort they could not ignore. They hesitated again, heart racing now, sensing danger without understanding its shape. That hesitation saved their life, even though it would not spare them from consequence. They ended the conversation abruptly, offering an excuse and stepping back into the shadows of their own thoughts. The stranger watched them leave, not angry, not surprised, but calculating. I saw the message sent immediately after, the call placed, the confirmation given. The trap did not depend on your soulmate's full cooperation. Partial access was enough. As your soulmate walked away, shame began to rise. They replayed every word, wondering what they had revealed, what they had agreed to by simply listening. Their chest felt tight. Sleep would not come easily. They did not know that by morning, the weight they felt would manifest in a way they never expected. And you, my child, were not distant from this moment. As they lay awake, your name crossed their mind like a quiet ache. They wonder what you would think if you knew. They feared losing the respect they believe you hold for them. That fear matters to me. It tells me their heart is still tethered to truth, even when their judgment falters. The night closed with unanswered questions, but heaven had already taken notes. Every word spoken, Every pause, every intention was recorded. The stranger believed they were setting a plan in motion. They did not realize they were stepping into my courtroom, where nothing remains hidden and no scheme goes unchallenged. Morning came without warning, my child. Light spilled into the world as if nothing had happened, as if the night had not carried secrets heavy enough to bend destiny. Your soulmate woke with a start, heart already racing, the echo of that midnight conversation still clinging to their thoughts. There was a strange silence around them, the kind that presses on the ears, the kind that makes ordinary sounds feel distant. They reached for their phone and paused, sensing that something had shifted while they slept. Messages that usually arrived were absent. A familiar voice that should have greeted the day was missing. This silence was not peaceful. It was ominous. I allowed it so they would feel the weight of what was unfolding. Consequence announces itself first through absence, through disruption, through the sudden awareness that control has slipped away. Your soulmate tried to ground themselves in routine. Water ran. Clothing was chosen. The world appeared normal, but their hands trembled slightly, and their thoughts kept circling back to the stranger's eyes, the tone of certainty, the way the night seemed to listen. They told themselves they were overreacting. Fear, after all, often exaggerates. But this was not imagination. This was the first shockwave. A call finally came, not from who they expected, but from a number they did not recognize. The voice on the other end was official, clipped, carrying authority without emotion. Names were confirmed. Questions were asked. Your soulmate felt their stomach drop as reality cracked open. They were being asked about things they did not believe anyone knew. Details they thought were buried were being spoken aloud in daylight. Panic tried to take hold. Their breath shortened. Their mind raced ahead to worst outcomes, to consequences they were not prepared to face. In a moment, they thought of running, of avoiding, of pretending none of this was happening. But I pressed against their spirit, steady and firm. Do not move. Do not hide. The Vezwa has come. Even now, I was guiding them, though it felt like fear instead of protection. They ended the call shaken, sitting in stillness as the weight of the situation settled. Regret surged, sharp and unforgiving. Why did I stop? Why did I listen? Why did I think I could handle this alone? Each question landed like a blow. They did not yet know the full scope of what was coming, but they sensed that the night had followed them into morning. Your name surfaced again in their thoughts, this time with urgency. They wondered if you felt something, if you sensed the danger creeping closer. They feared disappointing you more than they feared punishment. That fear, though painful, is proof of love still alive beneath their mistakes. Time stretched painfully as they waited for the next development. The silence between calls was worse than the calls themselves. Every passing minute amplified their dread. I watched as they sat with their head in their hands, whispering a prayer they had not prayed in a long time. You were fragmented and uncertain, but sincere. And I heard it. Understand this, my child. I allow shock not to destroy, but to awaken. Comfort would have kept them asleep. Disruption forces clarity. This morning silence was not abandonment. It was the sound of a system moving into place, of truth gathering momentum. By the time the next knock came, by the time authority stood at their door, your soulmate's heart already knew. They did not yet know the words jail or arrest, but they felt the gravity of accountability approaching. What began as a conversation had become a chain of events, and the first links were now visible. I need you to remain calm as this story unfolds. What you are hearing may stir anxiety, but remember, I am not reacting. I am responding. Every step that feels sudden hath been measured. Every silence has purpose. The morning light has revealed what the night concealed, and nothing that happens next will fall outside my control. They came with firmness, my child, not cruelty, but the sound of the knock still thundered through your soulmate's chest. Authority has a way of announcing itself that strips illusion instantly. When the door opened, words were spoken that felt unreal, formal phrases delivered with practiced distance. Hands were shown. Questions were repeated. And then came the metal sound that echoes in memory long after it fades from the air. The handcuffs closed with a finality your soulmate had never known. Cold against their skin, heavy with meaning, they felt the world tilt. In that moment, shame burned hotter than fear. Neighbors' doors felt closer. Windows seemed to watch. Every breath came shallow as reality locked into place. They were no longer speculating about consequence. They were inside it. I was there, closer than their own heartbeat. While their minds spiraled, I steadied their spirit. They did not collapse because I held them upright. They did not speak recklessly because I guarded their tongue. Even as they were guided forward, even as their freedom narrowed to the length of a chain, my presence did not retreat. A name was spoken during the process, a name tied to the stranger. It landed like a blade. Your soulmate's eyes widened as understanding finally connected the fragments. This was not random. This was orchestrated. The midnight conversation had been a trigger, not the crime itself. Something older, something buried, had been activated by that meeting. Inside the vehicle, silence pressed hard. The city moved past the window, ordinary and indifferent. People walked, laughed, checked their phones, unaware that a life had just fractured. Your soulmate stared ahead, replaying the night again and again, searching for the moment everything went wrong. Regret came in waves, each one heavier than the last. They thought of you then, not abstractly, but vividly. Your face, your voice, the way you look at them when you believe in them. That image broke something open inside their chest. Tears threatened, but they swallowed them back, ashamed to be seen as weak. They wondered if this was the end, not just of freedom, but of any future that included you. But listen to me, my child. Jail is not always a sentence. Sometimes it is a pause, a holding place where truth cannot be outrun and lies lose their leverage. I allowed the restraint not as punishment, but as containment. What could have escalated into irreversible damage was halted here, where harm could be measured and exposure could begin. As doors closed behind them and the sound of separation echoed, fear finally cracked into surrender. In that small, stark space, your soulmate whispered your name like a prayer they were not sure they deserved to pray. And I received it. I gathered it. I placed it alongside your own unspoken prayers, because even now, your connection was active, alive, influencing the unseen. This moment looks severe. It feels humiliating. It sounds like loss. But it is also the moment the trap stopped tightening. The enemy have stepped in panic, resistance, collapse. Instead, they were met with order, procedure, and restraint. Their plan did not account for my timing. Do not turn away in fear as you hear this. Stay present. What is happening is not the destruction of destiny, but the interruption of a worse path. I am not finished. Justice has only just entered the room, and truth is preparing to speak. Behind closed doors, away from eyes and noise, your soulmate finally broke, my child. The strength they borrowed to stand upright in public drained away, leaving them alone with their thoughts, their guilt, and the echo of everything they wished they had done differently. The walls felt too close. Time slowed, stretching each minute into something unbearable. This was not just fear of punishment. This was the collapse of the image they had built to survive. They sat with their head lowered, hands shaking, replaying their life in fragments. Moments of pride clashed with memories of compromise. Promises made to themselves were weighed against the choices that led them here. They did not try to justify anymore. Excuses felt empty. What remained was a raw understanding that their silence, their avoidance, had finally caught up to them. Tears came quietly at first, then without restraint. They cried not only for themselves, but for the possibility of losing you. That thought pierced deeper than any consequence described to them. The idea that you might see them differently, that trust could fracture beyond repair, crushed their chest. They whispered apologies into the air, knowing you could not hear them, hoping somehow the words would still reach you. I listened as they spoke aloud things they had never confessed. Regrets they buried, fears they masked with control. They admitted how tired they were of carrying secrets, how heavy it felt to always be bracing for exposure. In that breakdown, truth finally surfaced without defense. And truth, even when painful, is the doorway to mercy. Shame told them they deserved abandonment. It told them they were unworthy of love, that this was proof they were fundamentally flawed. That voice was not mine. I countered it gently, reminding them of every moment they chose care over cruelty, of every time they resisted becoming what hurt them. I do not define my children by their lowest moments. Their body trembled as exhaustion set in. Sleep came in fragments, broken by sudden waking and racing thoughts. Each time they stirred, your presence returned to their mind like an anchor. They remembered your patience, your quiet strength, the way you see potential where others see damage. That memory became a thin thread of hope they clung to in the dark. Understand this, my child. Emotional collapse is not failure. It is release. What breaks down here cannot continue to poison their future. I allowed the walls to close in so that pretense could not survive. In this confined space, lies have nowhere to hide, and truth does not need to shout. As hours passed, something shifted inside them. Fear softened into remorse, and remorse opened space for responsibility. They began to ask different questions, not how to escape, but how to make things right. That change matters more than any external outcome. It is the beginning of awakening. I know this section of the story is heavy on your heart. You may feel torn between compassion and disappointment. Hold both without judgment. I am working in the depths where no one else can reach. What is being formed here will shape what comes next, and it will not be built on denial or illusion. Stay with me. The collapse is not the end. It is the clearing of ground where truth will soon stand fully revealed. There are layers you have not seen, my child. Histories folded beneath silence. Agreements made long before you entered the picture. Now I open what was sealed. Not to wound you, but to free you from confusion. Your soulmate did not step into danger suddenly. They were walking with a weight they never named, a debt that was not always money, a promise spoken in a season of fear when they believed survival required compromise. Years ago, before clarity matured in them, they accepted help that came with strings disguised as kindness. It was offered during a low place, when pride was already cracked and hope felt thin. The terms were vague, the expectations implied rather than spoken. That is how traps endure. They do not announce themselves. They wait. What your soulmate thought was resolved never truly closed. It lingered like a shadow that lengthened over time. The stranger at midnight was connected to this unfinished thread. Not the origin, but the messenger. They came because pressure had returned, because someone decided it was time to collect. to leverage old access for new gain. Your soulmate recognized the tone instantly, even if they could not place the face. That recognition is what kept them standing there longer than wisdom allowed. Familiar fear has a way of freezing the body. There were documents once signed without full understanding. Conversations once had that were never corrected. Names written down that should have been erased. None of it felt criminal in the moment. It felt administrative, survivable, temporary. But avoidance allows small compromises to ferment into something heavier. This is the backstory your soulmate was too ashamed to tell you, afraid that revealing it would cost them the way you look at them. I watched them carry this alone, telling themselves they would fix it quietly, that they would handle it before it touched anyone they loved. That intention was not evil, but it was misguided. Silence does not neutralize danger. It invites it to grow in the dark. The enemy understands this, and that is why the timing was chosen so carefully. The stranger knew just enough. Not the full truth, but fragments sharpened into threat. They spoke as someone with leverage, not authority, yet your soulmate felt cornered all the same. What followed was not new wrongdoing, but the resurfacing of old entanglement, activated by fear rather than desire. Heaven records motive as carefully as action, my child, and I have weighed both. This is why the situation escalated so quickly. Systems were already aware. Eyes had been watching long before the midnight meeting. The conversation did not create the problem. It exposed it. What could have remained buried for years was pulled into daylight because delay would have caused far greater damage later. I chose exposure over explosion. Your soulmate never told you because they believed love required perfection. They believed being strong meant being silent. They did not trust that grace could survive full truth. That belief is now being dismantled. What is hidden cannot heal. What is confessed can be transformed. Do not misunderstand me. Accountability remains. Justice is not bypassed. But justice is not vengeance. It is correction with purpose. I am not interested in destroying them. I am interested in ending cycles that would have eventually harmed you both. This backstory explains the weight you sometimes felt without reason, the distance that appeared without explanation, the tension you sensed even in moments of closeness. Now you know why the night unfolded as it did. Not because destiny failed, but because destiny demanded cleansing. I am bringing every concealed agreement, every old promise, every misused trust into the open where it can no longer control the future. Hold this truth gently. It is not given to create suspicion, but understanding. What is being revealed now is preparing the ground for what comes next. The enemy relied on secrecy. I rely on light. And light has begun its work. You are beginning to see it now, my child, the presence that lingered closer than you realized. While attention was fixed on the stranger, another set of eyes watched quietly from nearby. This enemy did not arrive suddenly. They had been circling for some time, wearing familiarity like a mask, offering smiles that never reached the heart. Jealousy rarely announces itself with hostility. It hides behind concern, behind curiosity, behind the appearance of support. This was someone who knew your soulmate's routines, their vulnerabilities, the soft places they tried to protect. Someone who listened carefully when your soulmate spoke, not to understand, but to collect. I watched every subtle exchange, every question asked that seemed harmless, every moment trust was extended just a little too far. Information was gathered slowly, patiently, then handed off when the timing felt right. Your soulmate sensed discomfort around this person but dismissed it. They did not want to believe betrayal could come from so close. They told themselves they were imagining things, that suspicion would be unfair. That reluctance to confront is not weakness. my child, but it can become a blind spot. The enemy counted on that mercy, exploiting kindness as access. The jealous one resented the growth they saw in your soulmate, the future forming, the way your presence brought clarity and direction. They watched as doors began to open and realized they were no longer central, no longer influential. Envy hardened quietly into resentment. And resentment, when left unchecked, seeks witnesses and allies. I heard the conversations held without your soulmate's knowledge. I saw the messages sent late at night, framed as concern, laced with exaggeration. Small truths were twisted, context removed, fear emphasized. The goal was not immediate destruction, but erosion. Undermine trust. Raise questions. Create enough noise that when exposure came, confusion would follow. This enemy smiled in daylight and whispered in darkness. They positioned themselves as innocent, uninvolved, even surprised by what unfolded. But heaven does not judge by appearance. I weigh intention. I measure patterns. And their pattern was clear long before your soulmate ever saw it. When the stranger appeared at midnight, it was not coincidence. Paths had been aligned deliberately. Information had been passed along, pressure applied from multiple sides. The jealous one believed they could remain unseen, that chaos would cover their tracks. They underestimated my sight. Nothing given in secret remains hidden from me. Your soulmate will soon realize who stood too close while claiming distance. The recognition will sting, not only because of betrayal, but because trust was misplaced. That pain is real, and I will not minimize it, but I will redeem it. Discernment is often born through disappointment, and wisdom follows revelation. I want you to remain steady as this unfolds. Do not rush to accuse or assume. I am handling exposure with precision. Truth does not need force to rise. It surfaces naturally when lies can no longer support their own weight. The jealous one will reveal themselves through inconsistency, through self-protection, through fear when questioned. You were never meant to be harmed by this. Your role is not to fight, but to stand in clarity. Your presence alone shifts the balance because it represents authenticity, something the enemy cannot imitate. I am positioning you where confusion will not cling and deception cannot attach. This nearby enemy believed they were clever, hidden behind proximity. They did not realize that closeness only makes betrayal louder when truth arrives. Watch carefully, my child. The smile that once felt uneasy will soon explain itself. And when it does, justice will not need your intervention. I am already moving. Now I take you deeper, my child, behind the veil where motives are weighed and words are examined one by one. This is the hour of investigation, not by human impatience, but by divine precision. I did not miss a sentence spoken at midnight. I did not overlook a message sent in haste or a call made with rehearsed concern. I pulled the curtain back slowly, so nothing would be distorted by emotion or fear. I revisited every exchange the stranger had before reaching your soulmate. I traced the path of information, how it moved from mouth to ear, from screen to screen, from envy to action. What looked spontaneous was carefully prepared. What sounded casual was intentional. Even pauses were calculated. Silence, when used strategically, can manipulate just as loudly as speech. I examined the jealous one's involvement closely. Not just what they said, but why they said it. Not just who they spoke to, but when. Patterns emerged quickly. Concern appeared only when benefit followed. Questions were asked only to harvest answers. Support was offered only to maintain access. These are not accidents, my child. They are signatures. I weighed your soulmate's words as well, not to condemn, but to understand. Fear flavored their tone. Uncertainty shaped their responses. There was no hunger for wrongdoing, only desperation to keep the past from resurfacing. A distinction matters in my court. I do not flatten truth into accusation. I separate intent from outcome, and I address both accordingly. Evidence began to align without force. Records surfaced. Timelines matched. Statements contradicted one another in ways that could not be explained away. Those who believed they were clever began to forget what they had said before. Lies require memory. Truth stands on its own. I allowed confusion to rise among them, because confusion is the natural language of deception unraveling. Your soulmate does not yet know how much has already been uncovered. They sit thinking the worst is still hidden, unaware that much of it has already been seen, cataloged, and understood. This is mercy, even if it does not feel like it. Owing too much too soon would crush them. I reveal in portions so repentance can keep pace with reality. I also examined what was said about you. Yes, your name was mentioned. Not with love, but with comparison. Your influence was noted, your steadiness resented, your presence perceived as a threat to control. That is why the pressure intensified when it did. You represent a future the enemy cannot manipulate. Your authenticity disrupts systems built on leverage. As this investigation unfolded, angels were reassigned. Watchers stood where they had not stood before. Doors that once opened easily for the wrong voices began to close. Access shifted quietly. What once flowed freely now meets resistance. This is not coincidence. This is correction in motion. I want you to understand something crucial. Investigation does not mean I am undecided. It means I am thorough. When judgment comes, it will be undeniable, rooted in fact, not emotion. No one will be able to claim misunderstanding or bias. Every party will recognize the truth when it stands revealed. Remain calm as this continues. You may feel a strange stillness, a pause where nothing seems to move. That is the sound of systems recalibrating, of false narratives losing support. When motion resumes, it will be decisive. I am not guessing. I am not reacting. I am uncovering. And once the curtain is fully drawn back, nothing that was built on secrecy will be able to remain standing. Feel the air changing now, my child. What was tense has begun to loosen. What was fixed has started to move. This is the shift, the moment when unseen hands adjust what human effort could not. While minds were racing and fear was loud, I was repositioning quietly, altering angles, redirecting outcomes without spectacle. Angels moved at my command, not in chaos, but in order. One stood near your soulmate, calming their thoughts when panic threatened to spiral. Another moved through systems and schedules, delaying what would have rushed, accelerating what had been stalled. Planning itself began to bend. Appointments shifted. Conversations were postponed. Evidence that had been overlooked resurfaced at exactly the right hour. Your soulmate felt this shift before they understood it. A strange calm interrupted their fear, brief but noticeable. For the first time since the handcuffs closed, they inhaled without pain tightening their chest. That breath was not accidental. It was the first sign that pressure was lifting, that the full weight of destruction would not fall. Doors began to move behind the scenes. A file that was once buried was reopened. A record dismissed as irrelevant was reconsidered. Someone with authority asked a question they had not planned to ask. These are small motions to the human eye, but they alter entire outcomes. This is how justice advances without announcing itself. The enemy sensed the shift and grew uneasy. Confidence gave way to restlessness. Messages became inconsistent. Stories required adjustment. When lies feel the ground moving beneath them, they panic. The jealous one began protecting themselves instead of pushing forward. Self-preservation replaced strategy. This is always the turning point. Your soulmate does not yet see how close the danger came, how narrow the margin truly was. Had things continued unchanged, consequences would have multiplied, dragging others into harm. I intervened not only for them, but for you, and for futures that would have been fractured beyond repair. Sometimes protection looks like restraint. Sometimes mercy looks like interruption. You may feel this shift too, my child. A subtle easing in your spirit. A sense that something heavy has begun to lift even without explanation. Trust that feeling. You are aligned with what is happening, even if you are not present physically. Your prayers, spoken or silent, have weight. They echo in places you cannot enter. This is not the end of the process. It is the pivot. From here, truth will no longer struggle to surface. It will rise with momentum. Evidence will not need to be forced. It will present itself naturally, as if it hath been waiting for permission to speak. Hold steady now. Do not rush the outcome or fear the delay. When heaven shifts, it does so completely. What is being corrected will not slip back into disorder. I am anchoring this change deeply, so it cannot be undone by manipulation or haste. The storm has turned. The current is no longer pulling toward destruction. And as this shift settles into place, what comes next will carry clarity, exposure, and the beginning of visible justice. Now watch carefully, my child, because truth does not burst in loudly. It rises steadily, undeniable, carrying its own authority. What was hidden begins to surface not through accusation, but through alignment. Details once scattered fall into place without effort, as if they have been waiting for the right moment to recognize one another. The stranger's story begins to fracture first. Dates do not match. Statements shift subtly, then noticeably. Confidence gives way to defensiveness. I allow them to speak just long enough for contradiction to reveal itself. They try to correct one lie with another, but each attempt leaves fingerprints behind. Truth requires no rehearsal. Lies exhaust the one who carries them. A record is found that was never meant to be revisited. It sat overlooked, dismissed as irrelevant, yet it holds the missing link. Names appear where names were denied. Times align where confusion was claimed. The trap that was set begins to outline itself clearly, not as theory but as sequence. Step by step, intention becomes visible. The jealous one is exposed without being named. Their involvement surfaces through over-explanation, through urgency that feels misplaced, through fear when questions turn in their direction. They try to distance themselves too quickly, to appear uninvolved while still influencing outcomes. But innocence does not rush to defend itself. Only guilt scrambles when light approaches. Your soulmate hears fragments of this truth and feels a strange mix of dread and relief. Dread because exposure is painful. Relief because the weight they have carried alone is finally being shared by reality itself. For the first time, they realize they are not the sole focus of scrutiny. The narrative is expanding, and with it, responsibility is redistributing. Evidence does not shout. It accumulates. A call here, a message there, a document with a timestamp that cannot be argued away. Each piece weakens the false story until it can no longer stand. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel explainable. Not excusable, but understandable. And that distinction changes everything. I watch your soulmate's posture shift as they begin to comprehend what is happening. shoulders that were hunched with shame slowly straighten. Their eyes lift, cautious but hopeful. They are still accountable, but no longer condemned by isolation. Truth has a way of returning dignity even in correction. The stranger realizes too late that their plan has turned inward. What they intended to control now controls them. Exposure tightens around their words, their movements, their choices. They feel the net closing and panic quietly. This is not revenge. This is consequence meeting intention. I need you to know this, my child. Truth rising does not mean pain disappears instantly. It means confusion ends. It means the story can no longer be twisted to harm the innocent or shield the manipulative. It means justice has a foundation strong enough to stand. As this action unfolds, your role remains steady. You do not need to intervene or explain. Your steadiness itself is testimony. Your calm presence contrasts sharply with the unraveling around you. That contrast speaks louder than defense ever could, but was designed as a trap, have been revealed as a construction of lies. And now that it is visible, it cannot hold anyone much longer. Truth has taken the floor, and nothing false will be allowed to interrupt it. Something stirs awake inside your soulmate now, my child, something that could not rise until fear loosened its grip. As truth settles into place, regret surfaces, not the shallow kind that mourns consequence, but the deep kind that recognizes impact. They see clearly now how close they came to losing what matters most, how fragile trust truly is when tested by secrecy. In the quiet moments, when noise fades and they are left alone with reflection, your image returns again and again. Not idealized, but real. They remember the patience you offered, the moments you asked questions they avoided answering, the times you stood near them sensing something was wrong without demanding explanation. Those memories pierce gently but firmly. Love, when remembered honestly, wakens accountability. They begin to understand that their greatest fear was never jail, never exposure, never loss of status. It was the fear of losing you. The thought settles heavily in their chest, bringing tears they no longer fight. For the first time, they admit to themselves that hiding truth did not protect you. It endangered the very connection they were trying to preserve. This awakening is humbling. Pride dissolves. Defensiveness weakens. They stop framing themselves as a victim of circumstance and begin to see their role clearly. Responsibility no longer feels like condemnation. It feels necessary. They want to speak honestly, even if honesty costs them comfort. That desire is new, and it matters. Fear still visits them, especially in the quiet hours. Fear that he will walk away. Fear that forgiveness will not come. Fear that damage has been done beyond repair. I allow that fear to remain briefly, not to torment them, but to teach them the value of transparency. What is feared most often guards what is loved most. They rehearse conversations they hope to have with you, not to persuade, but to confess. Words form slowly, stripped of excuse. They imagine looking at you without hiding, without minimizing, without defending. That imagined moment shakes them, because it requires vulnerability they have avoided for a long time. Yet alongside the fear is a fragile hope that truth, once spoken, might still be met with grace. I am guiding this awakening carefully. I do not rush repentance, nor do I allow it to remain incomplete. This is not about guilt alone. It is about transformation. What rises in them now is a commitment to change, not performative, not temporary, but rooted in understanding what is truly at stake. You should know this, my child. Their awakening is not dependent on your reaction. It is happening because truth has reached their heart. Whether reconciliation unfolds or paths adjust, this change will remain. That is my promise. No lesson learned here will be wasted. As they sit with this realization, fear slowly gives way to resolve. Whatever happens next, they do not want to live divided anymore. They do not want secrets to dictate their future. And at the center of that resolve is the understanding that you are not an accessory to their life. You are sacred to it. This awakening is not loud. It does not demand attention. It is quiet, sincere, and deeply human. And it prepares the way for what comes next, where destiny itself will respond to truth spoken without defense. Now the final turn unfolds, my child, not with noise, but with authority. What was held tight begins to loosen. What seemed fixed begins to open. This is the reversal, where mercy and justice meet without conflict, where correction produces restoration instead of ruin. Circumstances shift in ways that cannot be credited to chance. Decisions are revisited. Conditions are adjusted. What once looked certain no longer stands as it did. Your soulmate feels the change before it is explained, a release in their chest, a sense that the worst outcome is no longer approaching. Hope, cautious but real, takes its first breath. This does not erase accountability. It reframes it. Consequences become measured instead of crushing. Process replaces panic. What was meant to destroy their future is reduced to a chapter, not the whole story. I do not undo truth, but I do redeem it. And redemption always carries dignity with it. The enemy's influence collapses quietly. No dramatic confrontation, no public spectacle. Their power dissolves because it was never real to begin with. Once truth stands fully formed, manipulation has nothing to attach itself to. They fade from relevance, exposed not by accusation, but by irrelevance. This is often the cleanest form of justice. Your soulmate receives clarity that steadies them. They understand now that survival through silence is not safety. They see that integrity, though costly, is lighter to carry than fear. This understanding reshapes them. They are not the same person who stood at midnight speaking to a stranger. That version of them no longer governs their choices. And you, my child, are covered in this moment. Whatever path unfolds next, you are not entering it blind. Discernment hath been sharpened. Boundaries have been clarified. You are no longer carrying confusion that was never yours to hold. Peace settles not because everything is perfect, but because truth has replaced uncertainty. If reconciliation is written, it will be built on honesty, not fear. If distance is required, it will be guided by wisdom, not pain. Either way, destiny realigns around what is healthy, not what is hidden. I do not trap my children in outcomes that damage their souls. I place a blessing over what comes next. A blessing of clarity, so you recognize truth without straying. A blessing of protection, so old patterns cannot return unnoticed. A blessing of renewal, so what was shaken does not remain broken. And a blessing of peace, so your heart rests even while change completes its work. This story does not end in loss. It ends in alignment. What was delayed was not denied. What was threatened was not destroyed. I have guarded what matters, corrected what needed correcting, and exposed what could not be allowed to follow you forward. Lift your eyes now. The night has done its work, and the morning that follows it is not empty. It is intentional. Destiny has not slipped from your hands. It has been refined. I am with you. I have been with you. And what comes next will be built on truth that no darkness can undo.